I pulled into my driveway, exhausted from a long week at work, looking forward to nothing more than a peaceful evening in my own backyard. But as soon as I stepped out of my car, my stomach dropped. The sound of loud music, the chaotic chatter of dozens of people, and the unmistakable scent of grilled meat and spilled alcohol filled the air. Confused, I glanced around, expecting to see a neighbor hosting some kind of outdoor event. But no, this wasn't happening next door. It was happening in my yard, my private property. For a few seconds, I just stood there, trying to process the insanity of what I was witnessing. My backyard, the one I had mowed, maintained, and paid for, had been transformed into a full-blown party venue. Balloons were tied to my fence, tiki torches lined my patio, and a DJ booth, an actual DJ booth, was set up near my garden, blasting bass-heavy music that rattled my windows. Strangers lounged in my lawn chairs, red plastic cups in hand, laughing as if they belonged there. A group of kids splashed in my pool, tossing an inflatable beach ball back and forth, completely oblivious to the fact that they weren't supposed to be there. My grill, the one I had spent a fortune on, was being used by some middle-aged man in a Hawaiian shirt, flipping burgers like he was hosting a backyard cookout, because, apparently, in his mind, he was. Then I saw her. Karen, the bane of my existence, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, and the HOA president, standing at the center of it all like she was the guest of honor at some exclusive event. She wore an obnoxiously large sun hat, a drink in one hand, and her ever-present smug expression on her face. She was laughing, chatting with a group of people I had never seen before, completely unbothered by the fact that she was trespassing. I marched toward her, my fists clenched, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice barely cutting through the blaring music. Karen turned, her expression shifting into one of exaggerated surprise, as if she had just noticed my presence. "Oh, you're home," she said with a fake smile. "I thought you'd be working late." I narrowed my eyes. "That doesn't answer my question. What is this? Why are there strangers in my yard? Why is there a DJ at my house?" She waved a dismissive hand. "Relax, it's just a little neighborhood gathering, for community bonding. The HOA thought it would be a great idea to have a casual get-together, and, well, your backyard was the perfect space for it." My jaw tightened. "You planned a party in my yard without asking me?" She rolled her eyes, taking a slow sip from her drink before answering. "Oh, come on. It's not like you use it that much anyway. Besides, your property falls under the HOA's jurisdiction, and as per the guidelines, communal events can be held in designated areas. We all agreed that your yard was ideal. It has plenty of space, a pool, and that lovely patio. Honestly, you should be honored." My blood boiled. "Honored? You broke into my property, threw a party, and now you're acting like I should be grateful? This is trespassing, Karen," she scoffed, tilting her head in mock amusement. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. No harm done. Everyone's just having a good time. If you want, grab a drink and join in. It's all about building relationships, I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I had dealt with Karen's antics before. Her ridiculous fines, her absurd rules about mailbox colors, her constant micromanaging of every minor detail in the neighborhood. But this was a whole new level of insanity. I turned, surveying the mess unfolding before me. Someone had knocked over one of my potted plants. Empty beer bottles littered the grass. My patio table, the one I had recently refurbished, was being used as a makeshift buffet table, covered in half-eaten plates of food. A guy I had never seen before was lounging in my hammock, scrolling through his phone as if he owned the place. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm, but every fiber of my being was screaming at me to throw these people out immediately. "This party ends now," I said through gritted teeth. Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking her head as if I was the unreasonable one. "Oh, don't be such a killjoy. It's almost wrapping up anyway. Just let everyone enjoy themselves for a little longer." I wanted to argue. I wanted to yell, but I knew that in Karen's twisted mind, she would always find a way to justify her actions. She had manipulated the HOA rules so many times that she genuinely believed she had authority over everything in the neighborhood, even my own backyard. I turned away, storming into my house, ignoring the laughter and chatter behind me. I needed a moment to think, to process. Later that night, After the party had finally ended, I stepped outside to assess the damage. The yard was trashed. Cups, plates, and napkins were scattered across the grass. My pool water had turned murky from whatever had been dumped in it. There was even a broken lawn chair floating in the deep end. My once pristine backyard now looked like the aftermath of a college frat party. Fuming, I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my emails. I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA, outlining every violation, every instance of trespassing, and every shred of damage that had been done to my property. I hit send, feeling a small sense of satisfaction, but deep down, I knew how this would play out. Karen would brush it off. The HOA would defend her actions. They always did. And that's when it hit me. If Karen thought my yard was fair game for HOA events, then maybe I needed to show her what that really meant. A thought crept into my mind, one so outrageous, so perfectly petty, that I actually smiled. If she wanted to use my backyard for a party, then I'd throw a party of my own, one she'd never forget. I sat in my living room, still seething from the mess Karen and her so-called HOA party had left behind. My backyard looked like a disaster zone. My pool was filled with trash, and the audacity of it all burned in my chest. The worst part was that Karen didn't even see anything wrong with it. She acted like she had the right to do whatever she pleased, twisting HOA rules to fit her agenda. Complaining wouldn't work. The HOA would just brush me off like they always did. Karen had them wrapped around her perfectly manicured fingers, and everyone knew it. As I sat there, my mind raced through every possible way I could get back at her. Filing a lawsuit? Too slow. Calling the cops? Useless, since the party was over now. Publicly humiliating her? Tempting, but not enough. Then, as I scrolled mindlessly through my phone, an idea struck me like a bolt of lightning. It started as a joke, something a friend had mentioned in passing. If she thinks your yard is public property, why not rent it out for something she'd absolutely hate? The moment the words clicked in my brain, I knew exactly what I had to do. I leaned forward, my fingers flying across the screen as I searched for the perfect opportunity. I didn't want just any event. I wanted something loud, chaotic, and completely out of Karen's control. Then I found it. A local biker club was looking for a space to host their upcoming rally, something big, something wild. They needed a private venue with enough space for their bikes, food trucks, and a live band. My backyard fit the bill perfectly. Without hesitation, I reached out to the club, explaining my situation. I half expected them to laugh me off, but instead, they were intrigued. A chance to legally host their rally in the middle of a snooty HOA neighborhood? They loved the idea. Within an hour, I was on a video call with their leader, a guy named Big Mike. He was exactly what I hoped for: leather jacket, thick beard, tattoos covering his arms. He listened as I explained everything, nodding slowly. "So let me get this straight," Big Mike said, a grin spreading across his face. "Your HOA president thinks she can just take over your yard, huh? And you want to send a little message?" I smirked. "Exactly," Big Mike chuckled. "You know, most people just complain and take the L. But you're playing the long game. I like it." We hashed out the details. The rally would take place the following Saturday. They'd bring their bikes, a barbecue setup, and live entertainment. I gave them permission to go all out. Loud music? Fine. A makeshift tattoo station? Perfect. Banners and flags? Absolutely. The louder, the better. My only request was that everything was legal. No laws broken, no damage to my property. Just good, chaotic fun. The next morning, I stepped outside and found Karen standing in her driveway, sipping coffee, looking smug as ever. I knew she was still gloating about her little stunt. She probably expected me to be seething, fuming, or maybe even considering moving away just to escape her tyranny. Instead, I smiled and gave her a little wave. Her expression faltered for a second. "Morning," she called out, forcing her usual condescending tone. "I hope you've had time to cool off. The party was a huge success. Everyone had such a great time. We're actually thinking about making it a regular thing." I clenched my jaw but kept my cool. "That's great, Karen," I said. "Really great. I think community events are a wonderful idea." She tilted her head, clearly not expecting that response. "Oh, well, I'm glad to hear you're finally seeing the benefits of the HOA. Maybe next time, you'll even participate." I just smiled. "Oh, don't worry. I've got something planned for next weekend. A little event of my own." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't like surprises, especially not when she wasn't the one in control. "Oh, what kind of event?" I shrugged, keeping my voice casual. "Just a gathering. Some like-minded folks getting together for some good food, some music. You know, community bonding." She smiled tightly, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She didn't trust me. Good. As the week went on, I finalized every detail. Big Mike and his crew were thrilled. They spread the word, and before I knew it, the event had doubled in size. More bikers signed up, some even bringing their families. A local food truck reached out, asking if they could set up shop. Another band offered to play. The whole thing was turning into a full-scale festival, and I couldn't wait. By Thursday, I had permits secured. Everything was by the book, legally sound. Karen couldn't touch me. I even had the necessary noise permits, so if she tried calling the cops, they'd just shrug and walk away. Friday evening, as I was setting up, a few early arrivals rolled in. The deep, rumbling sound of motorcycle engines echoed through the neighborhood as the first batch of bikers parked in my driveway. A few of my neighbors peered out from behind their curtains, whispering amongst themselves. Some looked intrigued, others looked terrified. Then Karen stormed over. She marched up my driveway, her hands on her hips, her eyes practically burning with fury. "What is going on here?" she demanded. I wiped my hands on my jeans and turned to her, feigning innocence. "Oh, just setting up for my event. You know, the one I mentioned." She looked at the bikers, then back at me, her face turning red. This is not an HOA-sanctioned gathering. You can't just bring in a bunch of them." One of the bikers, a tall guy with a massive beard, took a step forward. "Excuse me," he said, crossing his arms. "Is there a problem?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time, she looked unsure of herself. "This is a quiet neighborhood. We have rules. I will be filing a formal complaint with the HOA." I grinned. "Feel free. I already checked the regulations. There's nothing against private events held on personal property. In fact, I even got the necessary permits. Everything's legal." Her eye twitched. "This is unacceptable." I tilted my head. "You didn't seem to have a problem when the HOA hosted their event in my yard without permission. Now you're upset that I'm doing the same thing? Sounds a little hypocritical, don't you think?" She sputtered, searching for a response, but for once, she had nothing. I turned back to my setup, dismissing her entirely. The bikers laughed, already sensing the chaos that was about to unfold. Karen stomped away, muttering under her breath, but I knew she wasn't done. She was going to fight back, but so was I. Saturday morning arrived with an eerie calm. The neighborhood, usually filled with the sounds of lawnmowers and kids on bicycles, was oddly still, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stepped outside with my coffee, the sun casting a golden glow over the trimmed grass and the now spotless patio. The quiet was temporary. It wouldn't be long now. I took a seat on the edge of my porch and waited. The first rumble came at exactly 10 a.m., low and distant, like a storm on the horizon. A few birds scattered from a nearby tree as the sound grew louder, closer, deeper. Within minutes, the first wave of motorcycles turned onto my street. Chrome flashed in the sunlight, leather jackets flapped in the breeze, and engines roared like thunder as the bikers rolled in. They came in pairs, trios, and small groups, each more colorful and decked out than the last. Some wore bandanas, others helmets with flames painted on them. A few had sidecars with dogs wearing goggles. My neighbors peeked through blinds and curtains, jaws dropping in synchronized horror as the once quiet suburban road transformed into a scene from a biker movie. Big Mike led the charge, riding a custom chopper with a flame paint job and exhaust pipes that could rattle a foundation. He gave me a nod as he pulled into the driveway, his presence commanding attention without a single word. Behind him came a small convoy of pickup trucks hauling grills, tents, speakers, and coolers. My backyard, once a serene little space, was about to become a full-on festival ground. The bikers dismounted, stretched, and immediately got to work. Some pitched tents, others unpacked grills, and started marinating meat. A band began setting up near the edge of the lawn, testing their instruments with aggressive guitar riffs that echoed down the street. Karen's front door flew open. She stood there frozen, clutching a clipboard, mouth agape. For a few seconds, she looked like a statue, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. And then, like clockwork, she stomped toward me. "What is this?" "What have you done?" she shouted, her voice almost drowned out by the engines still pulling in. I smiled politely. "My gathering. Like I said, just some friends over for a little fun." She waved her clipboard frantically. "This is not acceptable. This isn't a community event. This is an invasion. These people don't belong here." Big Mike overheard and walked over, towering over Karen like a wall of leather and steel. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in his gravelly voice. "We were invited. Got all the paperwork. Want to see it?" Karen's eyes darted between him and me. "This is a quiet neighborhood. We have regulations. We have standards." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny. You didn't care about regulations when you threw a party in my backyard last week without my permission." She was flustered, grasping at straws. "That was different. That was a sanctioned HOA event." I gestured to the biker crowd. "This is a sanctioned private event. And fully permitted. Feel free to call the city if you want to double-check." Before she could respond, the band launched into a soundcheck that ended in a loud guitar solo. Karen flinched and backed away, her face red with fury. She turned and stomped back to her house, slamming the door behind her. The rally kicked off in full force. Grills sizzled as steaks and burgers cooked over open flames. A beer keg was tapped. A dunk tank was rolled in and quickly filled. Someone set up a tattoo booth under a pop-up canopy. People lined up for temporary ink, biker-themed, humorous, or just plain weird. The band started playing for real now, loud and fast, drawing cheers and claps from the growing crowd. And then came the flags. One of the bikers, with a sense of humor as twisted as mine, had printed a massive banner that read, "Welcome to the HOA Biker Bash," and for reasons unknown, decided to mount it on Karen's front lawn. Whether it was a mistake or pure chaos magic, it stood there in all its glory for the entire neighborhood to see. Karen burst out of her house again, shrieking like she'd been set on fire. She tore down the banner, screaming about trespassing, defamation, and something about the FBI. The best part? People were filming. Smartphones everywhere, capturing every meltdown, every reaction, every hilarious clash between Karen's prim and proper image and the raw energy of the biker crowd. By early afternoon, the place was packed. More bikers had arrived, some from out of town. A local news blogger showed up, snapping photos for his social media page. The dunk tank became a crowd favorite after someone placed a dummy shaped like a car on the seat, hit the target, and down it went into the water, much to everyone's delight. Of course, it didn't take long for Karen to make her next move. She called the police. I saw her on the sidewalk, phone to her ear, pacing back and forth like a general commanding troops. About 20 minutes later, 2 squad cars pulled up. Karen rushed to meet them, spewing a dramatic tale about a gang takeover, noise violations, and criminal activity. The officers approached the property, stern expressions on their faces, while Karen trailed behind like a smug school teacher waiting for a student to get punished. But when the officers reached me, I calmly handed them the folder I had prepared in advance: permits, noise allowances, event documentation. They flipped through it, asked a few questions, and then one of them turned to Karen. "Everything looks good here. They are within their rights." Karen's face twisted. But look at this. This is insane." The officer shrugged. "It's legal and peaceful. Nothing we can do." Defeated, Karen stormed back to her house, slamming the door with such force it echoed over the music. The rest of the day was perfect. The bikers danced, ate, drank, laughed, and shared stories. Neighbors who once hid behind their curtains started coming out, cautiously at first, but eventually drawn in by the festive energy. Some even grabbed plates of food and joined the crowd. Kids lined up to get fake tattoos. A few teenagers begged to take photos on the bikes. And there I was, sitting in my lawn chair, sipping a cold drink, watching the chaos unfold exactly as planned. For the first time since moving into that neighborhood, I felt completely in control. The look on Karen's face, the way she had to watch everything unfold helplessly from her window, was more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. The sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the now legendary biker bash. The music slowed down, people lounged on blankets, and someone even lit a small fire pit. As the day faded into night, the soft hum of laughter and engines was all that remained. I glanced over at Karen's house. Her blinds were shut tight, the lights off, like the house itself was sulking. She had started this game, but I had just taken it to a whole new level. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of silence. Not the calm, peaceful kind, but the kind that carries tension, like the world is holding its breath before a storm. I got out of bed, stretched, and walked outside to find my driveway clear, my backyard cleaned up like nothing had ever happened. True to their word, the bikers had taken care of everything. No trash, no damage, no trace of the mayhem that had unfolded just hours before. It looked exactly how it had before the rally, maybe even better. But I knew Karen wasn't done. She wasn't the type to let something like this slide, not after being humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. Sure enough, I didn't have to wait long. Around noon, a bright yellow envelope was taped to my front door. HOA violation notice. Big, bold letters. I laughed out loud before even opening it. Inside was a list of absurd infractions: hosting an unapproved gathering, excessive noise, unauthorized signage, failure to maintain community standards. It was practically a novel. Each offense came with a fine, some of them so ridiculous I had to read them twice just to believe they were serious. Karen wasn't just trying to punish me. She was trying to break me. I tossed the notice onto my kitchen counter and brewed some coffee, already formulating my response. Karen was pulling out every card she had, and now it was time for me to do the same. I called up a friend of mine, a lawyer who specialized in property and HOA law. I explained everything, from the surprise party she hosted in my backyard to the biker rally and the sudden avalanche of fines. My friend chuckled, then assured me that I had a solid case, better than solid, actually. By that evening, Karen had escalated things further. She called for an emergency HOA meeting, which, of course, she scheduled at her house. Flyers were delivered to everyone's mailbox, written in that fake polite tone she loved using. Community concerns and order restoration, it read. Everyone knew it was about me. She was trying to rally the troops, paint me as the villain, and reassert her dominance. But she had no idea how much the tide had already turned. When I showed up to the meeting, her living room was packed, more residents than I'd ever seen at an HOA event. Some were curious, others were clearly there for the drama. Karen stood at the front, smiling tightly, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. She cleared her throat and launched into a speech about community values, order, and how recent events had threatened the peaceful balance of the neighborhood. She talked about property values, neighborhood reputation, and safety concerns. It was all carefully worded, all designed to make her sound reasonable while pointing the finger directly at me without ever saying my name. When she finally opened the floor for comments, I stood up. All eyes turned to me. I thanked her for the opportunity to speak, then calmly laid out the facts. I reminded everyone about the unsanctioned party she hosted in my yard, how I was never asked or informed, and how the HOA had conveniently overlooked every rule she had broken. I showed pictures, videos, and emails, proof that I had tried to resolve the situation the right way. Then I shifted gears and presented the permits and documentation for the biker rally, all legal, all filed correctly. I showed the cleanup photos, the noise permits, and even the messages from neighbors who had actually enjoyed the event. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Karen's face was a shade of red I'd never seen before. One of the other board members, a quiet older man who rarely spoke, raised his hand and asked a simple question. Why were her actions never questioned or fined when she broke the rules first? Karen stammered, trying to redirect, but the questions kept coming. One by one, the residents began to chime in. Some were angry, others just fed up. It turned out I wasn't the only one she had pushed around. She had been enforcing rules selectively for years, fining people for petty things while ignoring violations from her own friends. The meeting spiraled out of her control fast. Someone suggested a vote of no confidence. Karen laughed nervously, brushing it off as a joke, but no one else was laughing. A motion was made. Hands were raised. It was happening right there in her living room. In less than 10 minutes, she was officially removed as HOA president. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The look on her face said everything. She stood there, clipboard shaking in her hand, trying to process what just happened. She had ruled the neighborhood for years, untouchable, unchallenged, and now, just like that, it was over. The next day, the new HOA president, an easygoing guy named Lewis, called me to chat. He said he wanted to talk about the whole backyard situation. We met on my porch, drinks in hand, and within 10 minutes, we agreed to officially strike the fines from my record and update the neighborhood rules to prevent any further abuse of power. From now on, no one could use someone's property for an HOA event without written consent. Common sense, but apparently, it needed to be written down for Karen's sake. Later that week, a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. She didn't make an announcement, didn't say goodbye, just loaded her things and left. I watched from across the street as she climbed into the passenger seat of a silver SUV, face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. It was over. She was gone. But fate, in its twisted brilliance, had one last surprise. A few days after she moved out, a couple came by to tour her house. I was trimming the hedge when they approached me to ask about the neighborhood. They were friendly, down to earth, and dressed in casual riding gear. A few minutes into the conversation, I noticed the Harley-Davidson keychain dangling from the man's belt. I asked if they rode. He smiled and said they'd been part of a local biker club for years and were looking for a quieter place to settle down. I nearly choked on my laughter. It was perfect. After all the chaos, all the drama, Karen's former house was about to be sold to a biker couple. I wished them luck, genuinely. They seemed like good people. As they walked toward the house, chatting excitedly about porch space and garage size, I looked out over the neighborhood. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I belonged here, not just tolerated, not just surviving, but actually part of something. Karen had started a war she couldn't win. She had underestimated everyone, especially me. And now she was gone, her reign finally over. The days that followed Karen's departure felt strangely peaceful, like a constant buzzing sound had finally been shut off. The air in the neighborhood seemed lighter. People smiled more. Conversations that used to be whispered behind closed doors were now happening out in the open, right on front lawns and sidewalks. It was like a collective exhale after years of holding it in. For the first time since I moved in, people didn't just wave politely, they stopped to talk. Some neighbors even thanked me. One guy, who had lived 3 doors down the whole time, but never said more than a hello, told me how Karen once fined him for having a garden gnome that was apparently too whimsical. I laughed until my sides hurt. Still, I knew Karen's influence wouldn't just disappear overnight. The HOA, even with new leadership, was still tangled in the ridiculous rules and loopholes she'd carefully crafted. So I made it my mission to work with Lewis, the new HOA president, to fix what she had broken. We met several times, going over the handbook, rewriting clauses that gave too much power to board members, and clarifying what could and couldn't be enforced. I wanted to make sure no one else could ever pull what Karen did again. No more backyard takeovers, no more selective fines, no more nonsense about paint shades being emotionally disruptive. Lewis turned out to be a solid guy, fair, honest, and most importantly, someone who didn't take himself too seriously. The other board members, now free from Karen's grip, began speaking up more. One of them, a retired teacher named Sharon, even brought brownies to a meeting, which was a bigger deal than it sounds. Under Karen, even snacks were considered unauthorized distractions. We also reviewed every fine and complaint filed over the past year. Turns out nearly a third of them were either made up or wildly exaggerated. The HOA issued apologies when needed, refunded unfair fines, and slowly started rebuilding trust with the residents. It wasn't easy, and some folks were still skeptical, but the shift was obvious. The whole place felt less like a gated kingdom and more like a neighborhood again. Meanwhile, I got my yard back. I replanted some flowers that had been trampled during Karen's party, replaced a few patio chairs, and even installed a motion sensor camera, just in case. Not because I expected trouble, but because a little paranoia was healthy after everything that had happened. Still, every time I stepped into that backyard, I couldn't help but grin. That space had gone from being the scene of one of the most frustrating moments of my life to the stage for one of the most satisfying victories I'd ever experienced. A week later, I was enjoying a rare lazy afternoon, lounging in my hammock with a book and a glass of lemonade, when I saw the biker couple walking down the street again. They had closed on Karen's old house and were officially moving in. I waved, and they crossed the street to say hello. Their names were Jax and Danny, and they were just as friendly as they'd been during their first visit. We talked for a while, mostly about mundane things, trash days, local diners, the best time to mow your lawn without annoying everyone. Then Jax glanced around the neighborhood and said, almost shyly, "So, we heard about the, rally." I chuckled. Yeah, that got a little wild. Danny grinned. Legendary, from what we've been told. Honestly, we love it. People like to assume bikers are trouble, but we just want to ride, eat good food, and be left alone. Your kind of energy, that's exactly what we were looking for. I told them they'd fit in just fine now that Karen was out of the picture. We joked a little more, and before they left, they invited me over once they got settled for a backyard barbecue. I accepted without hesitation. There was something poetic about it. The woman who tried to rule over everyone losing her throne to the very people she would have hated living next door to. A few evenings later, Lewis invited the neighborhood to a casual HOA gathering. Something light, nothing formal. It was held in the park this time, not on anyone's property, and there were food trucks, music, and even a bounce house for the kids. It felt like a real community event, not the stuffy, micromanaged show Karen would have turned it into. People brought lawn chairs, blankets, drinks. Everyone mingled. For once, no one was whispering about rule violations or parking violations. They were just enjoying themselves. At one point, Lewis pulled me aside and raised his cup in a half-toast. "You know," he said, "this all started because someone decided to stand up. You could have just taken it, moved out, ignored it. But you didn't. You pushed back, and now look at this place." I nodded, humbled but proud. I just wanted my backyard back. Lewis laughed. "Well, you've got that and a whole lot more." As the sun set and the park lights flickered on, I realized he was right. I hadn't just reclaimed my yard. I'd reclaimed the spirit of the neighborhood. People were relaxed, smiling, forming new connections that hadn't existed before. It was the kind of place I had hoped it would be when I first moved in. Later that night, I sat in my backyard again, under the string lights I'd put up just days earlier. The sky was clear, stars scattered across it like spilled sugar. I leaned back in my chair, sipping a drink, feeling that rare kind of peace that only comes after chaos has finally settled. No shouting, no music blasting from unauthorized parties, no tyrants wielding clipboards prowling the sidewalk. A low rumble rolled down the street. I looked up and saw Jax riding his bike home, headlights casting long shadows as he pulled into his driveway. He gave me a nod as he passed, and I returned it with a grin. The universe really had a sense of humor. A few minutes later, Danny came out with a tray of food and waved at me from across the fence. I waved back, laughing to myself. This was my kind of neighborhood now. As I sat there, one final thought crossed my mind. Karen had spent years turning the HOA into her personal kingdom, ruling with a mix of fear, manipulation, and manufactured authority. She thought she was invincible, untouchable. But all it took was one backyard, one rally, and one very loud message to bring it all down. She started the war. I just finished it, with a barbecue, a few dozen motorcycles, and the kind of neighbors you only dream about. And the best part? I didn't just get revenge. I got my home back.